there are literally hundreds of books that you can read to find out more. Obviously, I can't, and that's not a euphemism. That's true. Hundreds. There's almost hundreds of authors, to be honest with you. Some have written multiple books on this. But we did our best to do a brief tackling, if you will, of the subject this morning. Who has a question? Yes, Dave.
There are certain people who take that binding, I forget if it was Warfield or who it was, but one of the older theologians takes the binding that he was no longer able to go into heaven, like in Job. That Satan at one point in time in history was able to assemble himself. He still had the luxury of going into heaven. But in 70 AD, that was cut off.
In 70 AD, you're at the cross.
Well, I'm not quite.
Okay.
I'm not sure where, okay. But somewhere in that time period, that was cut off. And there's some thought processes where that was the binding that was happening. He simply wasn't allowed in heaven anymore.
Right.
He's still able to, roar like the lion and things like that. But then there's also, obviously, there's other points of thoughts on that we don't really need Satan. We're wicked enough,
right,
that we don't need Satan to deceive us. Like, our fleshly desires will take us there every time.
Right.
If God does not restrict us.
Right.
We are just as wicked as He is, but God places a restriction.
We're as wicked as He is with less ability.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we don't need Him any more or any less.
Right.
We're wicked enough. So those are two points.
There is support for that idea, again, from other passages. For example, and this does go along with the idea that the binding of Satan happens at the same time as the expansion of the kingdom of heaven. And I think that a parallel or a passage that speaks to that is a passage, I believe it's Luke, might be Matthew, where Christ gets really excited and he says, I saw Satan fall from heaven. Okay? That's at the same time that he sends out his disciples to begin the discipling process. So it seems to me we have a parallel passage there, that the restriction of Satan happens at the same time as the expansion of Christ. And so, the guy that I have the most confidence in, Phil Kaiser, believes that that's at 70 AD. I think that's kind of hard to, and I have such respect for him, but how can 70 AD be greater as far as the restriction of Satan than the cross itself? We have tremendous language in the scriptures of the victory of the cross. So I can't answer your question, but I think it has to be the cross and the resurrection and ascension, if you will.
I was going to say maybe it's the ascension, because at that point, how can Christ and Satan live
be in the same place?
Yeah.
And certainly in ascension, that's where Christ takes his place at the right hand of God, and that's where he begins his mediatorial reign. Psalm 2. No doubt about that. Yes, Ryan.
Maybe this is what makes it challenging, but what do you understand as his loosening then at the end of that 1,000 years and going back out again? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. My thought on that is, the question is, what about his loosing at the end of the 1,000 years? Actually, that'll be described later on in the chapter. Yeah, it will be. I will say this. I am a postmillennialist because I believe that the idea of that answers the most questions. I will say, quite frankly, I've said before, I don't think my position answers them all. So I've got a position I think that addresses the most. That idea of Satan being loosed is a problem for all positions. I think it's a bigger problem for my position than it is, let's say, for the pre-mill position. I heard, but it's still a problem even for the pre-mill position. A bigger problem for me, why, if Christ's kingdom is expanding, why does this loosing thing happen? Even J. Vernon McGee, anybody here familiar with J. Vernon McGee? Yeah, I mean, yeah, a long-time radio preacher and solid dispensational premill defender. Even he said in a broadcast, I heard him say, he said the question is why does God leave Satan loose the second time? And J. Vernon McGee said, well, if you can tell me why he left him loose the first time, then I can tell you why he left him loose the second time. So even he's recognizing that this is a challenge. And so part of my thinking is it's not, the fact of the matter is it's just a challenge for every position, no matter what position you hold. So it's hard to, it's a bigger challenge, I think, for me, but it's still a challenge for everyone. And so I don't think that as much should dictate your millennial position. It's a hard one. And I've struggled with it. I know John, when he taught in Sunday school, wrestled with that as well. We'll wrestle with it more when we get there because there's more of a description later in the chapter of what happens when he's loosed, which we will get to and deal with more. Yes, John?
Yeah, along those lines, when I was studying the idea of common grace, that as Christ's kingdom advances through history and people become more and more in line with God's law, they're going to be externally in line, but not necessarily internally. And there will be that final judgment, or at the end, there will be people who, when they finally have to make the decision, I'm on this side or I'm on that side, that's right as Christ comes back. And then that's kind of a loosening where Satan does his final deceit on the goats, and of course has no effect on the sheep. That's the best I can do with that.
Yeah, and I said earlier, in other words, Satan's loosed again, and we find out who really believes in Christ and who does not at the end of the golden age. I said earlier there's camps within premillennialism. Well, here there's camps within postmillennialism, because there are those that believe the golden age is generally like a godly time. There's sheep and goats. There are others. Warfield was one of them, apparently. Our friend Martin Selbrede is another that believes that everyone will be saved. Well, at the end, which makes that even a bigger challenge, I think, for that for this idea of Satan being loosed. And we'll see that he's not alone when he's loosed. He has plenty of people helping him out. They're very interested in his program. We'll see that. Yes, Ruth Ann.
What is all-mill? Can you explain the difference between all-mill and post-mill?
It has to do with the idea of the literal 1,000 years. Are we talking about 1,000 years? Even the pre-mills will say it's 1,000 years. Count them. 1,365 and 1/4 days. Okay. The post-mills say it's a description of a long time, of a golden age in some future time, right? The all-mills will say there's no golden age, there's no 1,000 years. This is all sort of figurative language, and the wheat and the tares grow together. Good people get better, perhaps bad people get worse. But forget about the idea of a golden age. A golden age is something both post-mills and pre-mills accept. If you follow me on that, both accept the idea of a golden age. They argue about what it looks like, but they both accept that idea. The all-mills say, no, doesn't exist. The world just kind of keeps on going the way it is. That may be a little simplistic, but that's pretty much the position. No golden age. No millennium. Yeah, at the end, there will be a consummation, but in the meantime, what you see is what you get. Well, but you can't be that in all mill, as far as I know. Well, that's the full preterism thing, that's just a different animal. They believe that Christ is never coming back. He already came back in 70 AD. So it just goes, the world just goes on and on and on, world without end. And the world itself is eternal. I can't accept that, because I believe in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If it had a beginning, it has an end. Seems to me. Yes, Jeremiah.
You mentioned that Satan is limited in deceiving the nations, and you related that to Eve being tempted.
Yeah.
Can you verify how that's related?
Okay. What I was saying was that the fact that Satan can no longer deceive the nations, does that mean that the nations will no longer be deceived? In other words, is that a parallel statement? Can we say it this way? Okay? Satan can no longer deceive the nations. Therefore, we believe that no nation can ever be deceived. And I say no. Because in the end, yes, the tempter did deceive Eve, but in the end, she took of the fruit of her own volition. She couldn't blame it on Satan. So in other words, even if, and this is, theologians argue about that, they ask this question. Even if the tempter wasn't there, would Eve eventually have taken of the fruit? There's a question for you. Fact is, Eve could not blame Satan. She was ultimately deceived, and she did it on her own volition. The fact that nations will still be deceived does not mean that Satan is not bound. If you follow me on that. Nations will still be deceived, as what Dave was sort of mentioning that a little bit earlier, because of wicked, sinful people. I saw another hand. Yes?
The all-millennial thing has always been the hardest one for me to get my head around. So a couple questions about that. Do you know what they believe about the loosing of Satan? That's the spiritual application of that. What are some key exponents of that view? You said some major names for the other views.
Yeah.
And then one more question. What's the typical view of Revelation that goes along with the all-millennial?
Okay. Let's see if I can answer those questions. First of all, I want to answer the easy one first. A modern proponent, as I understand, of all-millennialism is Voddie Baucham. As I understand, best I can tell, he's an all-millennialist, Voddie Baucham. Now, that's just one. A lot of a lot of mainstream Presbyterians, R.C. Sproul, best I could tell, all-millennialists, R.C. Sproul. To answer the question, what about the loosing of Satan? Best I can tell, the way they do that is that's a picture of a final judgment, a fiery judgment, if you will, of all who still don't believe on the earth and all that's sinful. And that's a picture of getting rid of all that, burning up the whole mess. That's the best I can do with that. That's the best. And your third question?
What's the correlation to the views of Revelation? Is there a certain view that they usually take of Revelation itself? Like futurist, whatever it is?
Most of the all-mills that I know were more, and back in the Reformation, they took more the historicist view of it, if you will. But Greg, in his book, he basically historicist, pre-mill, all-mill, post-mill. So I mean, they take their own view of the book, and a lot of what they say is what they do is they take a lot of the victorious language in the book of Revelation, and there's definite victorious language. They take that and sort of apply it personally, if you will. This is a picture of Christ's domination and his work in my own life, this sort of thing. They do that a lot. In terms of going figurative, the all-mills do that by far the most in the book of Revelation. I think in a sense the pre-mills do it the least, the amills definitely do it the most. There's another question. Yeah, go ahead.
Believes that there's going to be a temple rebuilt.
Yes.
Which view is that?
That's a dispensational pre-mill. That's not all pre-mills. That's dispensational pre-mills.
How can you believe that there's going to be another temple if the original temple was destroyed and Christ took its place?
Well,
Am I understanding that incorrectly?
no, you are understanding it. You're absolutely understanding that. If you follow a lot of, like David Jeremiah's just written another book on prophecy, and one of the things that keeps coming up, when I was in college, I heard about the plans, the blueprints were there for another temple. They're still talking about that other temple. But I guess if they can worship at the Wailing Wall, which they say is a temple wall, which I don't think it is, I think it was a fort, Fort Antonia. I believe the evidence is very strong that that's the case. I don't believe it's a temple wall at all. But I guess if you can, I guess it's a matter of putting some bricks together and so forth and building a temple. I see that as, presently, what's that? Well, your modern Jew in Israel is basically an atheist. That's basically what you're looking at. Now, there's a lot of Orthodox folks that are not atheists as we would understand it. But the folks of the Wailing Wall in Israel are the minority. So they're going to somehow have to convince the rest of them to build a temple. Right now, you're not building any temples. You're just not. It's not practical. It won't happen. And I myself have grown weary, frankly, of listening to all the temple talk. I've heard it all my life. I'm 61 now. But, I answer your question this way. If they can sew up the temple veil and keep on going through animal sacrifices, I guess it's possible they could build another temple. I guess they could. I guess it's possible. Hasn't happened yet. But that's one of the problems I think with a pre-mill position, because best I can tell, you need, if the rapture can occur at any time, then it can occur at any time, but oftentimes you have to have that temple built in order for the rapture to occur. That to me is a challenge. You can't have a timeless, signless rapture and have to wait for the temple at the same time. You can't do both. That's a challenge there. Yes, Dan.
Why would dispensationalist Christians be excited to go back to any type of animal sacrifice? There's warnings about that in Hebrews.
Yeah.
Why would that be a good thing? That'd be like an abomination after Christ's perfect sacrifice to go back to slaughtering those.
That's my answer. Yeah. They get that from Ezekiel. And Ezekiel being very specific about temples and about land and so forth. And Ezekiel has these very specific language. And there's animal sacrifice going on in Ezekiel, no question about it. And I think that's all they can consistently do. If you're going to accept the Ezekiel passage as a future millennium and a future temple, you just have to take the animal sacrifice along with it. That's really the best I can do with that. I can't do any more than that with that. I just can't. Yes?
To answer directly, Dan, on that, not that it wasn't a direct answer. The Christians are excited about it because they won't be here. They're raptured out. Our troubles are all over.
But would they consider that to be a good thing?
Doesn't matter, they're in heaven now.
I know, but they would also hold the position that the world is getting worse and worse. Would that be a good thing?
Well, it gets worse and worse and worse until the raptures, the tribulation. You got the rapture, you got the tribulation, and then you got this temple, but, we're out of here. We got no troubles. Israel gets their place in the sun for 1,000 years, and then it's all over. And then they're all converted. The Christians are happy because their problems are over.
Yeah, and the idea that it's getting worse and worse does not necessarily apply to the millennium. It applies to history now.
Right, until you get to the millennium.
Right. And then in the millennium, that's when the temple and the sacrifices are reset up during the millennial period. Animal sacrifices. That's the system. Yes?
I know you talked about it already. So if Revelation was really written for those in the 70 AD period,
Yes.
what is the greatest benefit of us understanding it? Like what? I know it's the Word of God. That's like, what should we really be getting out of it?
Yeah.
Because so often I think, I've been going through Kaiser's stuff. I've been reading some of these things off and on. In the end, I hold to my position. In the book of Revelation, it's kind of doesn't hold the same water as Hebrews and, some of the other books, Romans maybe. Because it's just, yeah, I got my position, I'm happy with it, don't challenge me. I will argue it to the death, and that's just, what good is Revelation?
There you go. Now there's a question for a study of the book of Revelation. What good is it after all? Yes. Yeah, we're in the 20th chapter. What good is Revelation? I can answer that from experience I've had very, very recently. Very recently, I was home doing some discussing, and some real discouraging stuff came up. I mean, real discouraging. Now, what kind of encouragement do I really have? Well, I have the encouragement that my labor is not in vain in the Lord, but that's a statement not made in a vacuum. To me, Revelation gives context to all of history. And I believe you don't have context to history at all unless you understand this book. To me, that's the good of Revelation. There is a king. He overcame the biggest problems at the time of the early church. 7 different major persecutions. You've probably written about them or read about them. Most of the time they talk about persecutions, they don't use the time so much as they use the emperor, is how they usually talk about that. And Christ overcame them all. And to me, that gives context to my little struggles every single day. And I actually, maybe I think about more because I'm preaching through it. But I actually was thinking about Revelation just actually yesterday in the context of some discouraging things that I'm looking at right now. To me, Revelation gives great encouragement to me today, just like I believe it gave great encouragement to them then. Excuse me? Yeah, absolutely. Remember, our theme for Revelation is those who are faithful to Christ will be rewarded. That's something to remember when you feel like you don't want to be faithful anymore. When you feel like, just think about this, right? I've lived in this area all my life. Went to Twin Valley Bible Chapel just down the road. We have, this is annoying to me. We have 3 major churches in this area. I might have mentioned before, we got Twin Valley Bible Chapel, we have High Point Baptist Chapel, we have the Evangelical Free Church. And right in the middle of them, we're welcoming this casino. What are we doing? What have I been doing all my life? Drag queen story hours. What have I been doing all my life? Growing up in the family that I grew up in, my dad read us the Bible. Raising our 9 kids, trying to teach them the Bible. What am I doing? Well, I need, at times, encouragement to be faithful. I think no book does that like Revelation. No book, I believe, does it with the emphasis Revelation does. Other questions? Yes. Yeah.
2 quick points. One is, we talked about at the very beginning, Revelation is a figurative book. When we get to the 1,000 years, our premillennial friends want to take it very, very literally. when you take a look at Deuteronomy, was it, I've written down somewhere. It talks about 1,000 generations. Deuteronomy's not a figurative book. It's a historical book. But we're not, that we have to take figuratively. The 1,000 years in Revelation we have to take literally. It seems that that's completely on its head. Just a point about that. And then the other thing is that from
Okay,
history.
let me stop you for a second.
Yes.
If we're going to, we can't take the 1,000 generations in Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 6 and Exodus 20, or Deuteronomy 5, showing mercy to thousands of generations of those who love me. We can't do that if we believe in an anytime rapture. You can't have both. You gotta have one or the other. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just historically, from the cross, up until that time, you had the nation of Israel as the repository of God's Word. And from the cross, we have this explosion of knowledge of the glory of the Lord.
That's right.
As it spreads across the earth, the nations, it's historical. The nations are not all deceived. Up until that time, they weren't.
They were. Every one of them. Every one of them were. The only small exception we have is for a short time, perhaps Nineveh, which is a sort of a picture of what I believe what was going to happen in the future. It gave them a picture of what of the Gentiles turning to Christ, and we have major statements in the Old Testament of the Gentiles turning to Christ, big time statements throughout, which the Jews during the New Testament, the ones who hated Christ, rejected that idea entirely of the Gentiles turning to Christ. All right, I want to thank you here for your kind attention here this morning.